Hi, everybody, and welcome to In Her Words. If you grew up watching PBS, or maybe now have kids watching, we have people like Sara DeWitt to thank. Sara is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of PBS KIDS and is spearheading a new world where technology combines with these beloved shows for more accessibility, interactive episodes, podcasts, and games. This conversation is a fascinating look into the business and future of PBS. Sara, we are so excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for the time. You guys have so much going on, but not kidding. Today was like our third conversation about how much we love PBS and how just all the cool, innovative things. But when I was reading the briefing and going back, I swear I got teary thinking about Arthur. So my oldest son is 28. And Arthur was just such a part of his life and our lives with having kids. Yeah. And it's still going, little Arthur. And it's still so relevant. And you guys are keeping everything so relevant. We love it.
Oh, thank you. What a great introduction. Thanks.
Well, what you're doing in this space is I don't think it gets enough attention. It doesn't get enough press. We did a podcast not too long ago with the team from DreamWorks and their children and family animation and talking about growth. But you guys are really the OG. I mean, you are the children's programming and that accessibility for children. So as you think about your career, can you walk us through a little bit? You were a teacher and, then moved into kind of media research, but what about what you wanted to do in your career in teaching and what you thought you were going to start out with? Why was PBS important to you, and what was the draw to really get involved there?
Right. And how did I end up here? Right. Well, I mean, I could start way back in that I grew up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Sesame Street and the Electric Company. So I definitely was a PBS kid myself. I was born in Alaska, and at that time there was not broadcast television. Everything kind of came on tape from the States, and my mom would say, like, Mr. Rogers was always like the most important thing for our family in getting around the TV. So I definitely was raised with it. And I come from a family of educators who all worked on early childhood. My grandfather was an elementary school principal. My grandmother on the other side founded a daycare center. And I think, and my brother is now an elementary school teacher. And I think what it meant was, even as a child, my family always viewed children as being really important and worthy of attention and respect. So when I went into college and was thinking, I was doing an English major, I immediately focused on children's literature and early childhood, and then did a minor on children's studies, because that's what always had been really important. It wasn't until I got there that I realized, like, oh, wow, this is not what a lot of people start with when they think about importance of education. They often start with higher ed or high school. Right. And for us, it was always early childhood, elementary school. So you're right. I was a preschool teacher that's what I did as an intern when I was doing my master's degree. And I taught 3-year-olds and loved it. But through that process, I was really thinking about kids and literacy and the process of how they learn to read. There, obviously a lot happens in literacy research. And that was one of those times again, where there was a lot happening in literacy research. So I thought I wanted to go into publishing.
Okay.
But to get to your question, what happened was, during that master's degree, there was an experimental class offered that was cross-listed between English master's department and computer science.
Oh, interesting.
This was in the mid-90s.
Wait, were you still in Alaska?
No, I was in college. So I was in California.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was only in Alaska till I was 4.
Oh, okay.
But yeah. Okay. maybe even left before that, like 3. When I was doing this master's degree, they offered this experimental class, and I had been really interested in technology. I was like the first of my roommates to do email, things like that. And so I signed up for this course, and the prereq for the English master students was to take an HTML course.
Okay.
So I had to learn HTML before I could even take it. And then the prereq for the computer science students was they all had to take improv. And then they put us all together. And the whole idea of this, these two professors who put it together, was that you had all of these technologists who were being put into the situation where they needed to create story, but they didn't have any background in that because this tech industry was taking off so quickly. They discovered like technologists were then writing like game scripts or trying to think about the pathways that a user might need, but they didn't have any background for that. And that English students understood narrative, but they were too afraid of the technology to get near it.
Right.
And so what would happen if you put us all together? And it was an incredibly mind expanding experience for me. It made me think about drama and the ways that you would put together a play or an interactive experience. And I came out of it saying, I think I want to go into children's software. I think that's actually the direction I'd rather go than publishing. So I took a job to pay off my student loans so that I could pursue what I wanted to do next. But when I felt like I was in a position to look somewhere else, I made a list of organizations, and PBS was at the top of them.
Right.
And I applied to answer viewer mail, and in the informational interview, I remember she looked down and said, "Wait, you know HTML and you have a child development background? Can you come back tomorrow? I'd like you to talk to our new web division."
Okay.
So I was hired in 1999 as the second person to begin work on the new PBS KIDS website and really try to think about how would you take these longstanding children's programs that were really linear video narrative and make them into an interactive experience.
Right, and into gaming. How open to new technology and these new ideas was PBS as an organization? Because it's so counterintuitive to say, okay, they've been doing this for over 50 years, and they're really leading edge from a gaming as education and a technology standpoint. So how open was the organization to like grow this division you were entering?
Very much. So it's interesting you say, like, we've been around a long time, and I think that makes people assume that kind of like we have a staid way of doing things. But if you think about like who started PBS, like the first shows on, Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood were incredibly innovative at the time. Sesame Street using that short form content, like being all built off of, an academic paper that Joan Gans Cooney wrote about, could you deliver preschool type experiences over television? And then Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, really breaking that fourth wall, talking directly to the child and inviting the viewer in and thinking of it as an opportunity for social emotional connection. Those things were incredibly innovative at the time. So if you think about 1999, the web is just taking off. There's a lot of question about whether it makes sense for kids to be there, but we know kids are going there. It actually was Fred Rogers' production company who really, PBS had started a website for children, but they were the ones who really stepped forward and said, we would like to make Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in a digital space, because the opportunity for a child to explore that digital space is an extension of the program and of the mission. So it was Fred Rogers himself. There's an episode where he introduces viewers to his online, like his web neighborhood, I think is what he called it. And he was constantly also trying to push that, like, what is the opportunity that this new media type and this new technology is bringing to us to further this non-commercial mission of educating and connecting with kids. So I think back to some of that first testing we did. So the first website really that I was really working on was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So dream job. And we went into a school and sat in front of kids who, many of whom had never worked with a mouse or a computer ever. And so I sat down with this little girl who scrolled her mouse over one of the characters, and X the owl waved. And she jumped back and waved back at the computer. And that was one of those moments where I was like, oh, this is true interactivity. This is
Right.
a way of connecting with characters that just it isn't something that that we had been able to do yet in the same way, except in that kind of um, in television that calls for a response but isn't expecting it.
Right.
And this is a chance for kids to actually interact back. So long way of answering
Oh,
your
no,
question,
it is.
which
It's
is that
fascinating. And
PBS has always,
yeah,
certainly in my experience, in my over 20 years here, has really said, okay, what is the new technological advance that we need to be thinking about in order to further this mission into media types that can be a positive experience for children.
I know one of the missions is the accessibility, for
Mm-hmm.
children, and that you could have very easily said, okay, we do this thing on our public television, which everyone has access to, so that their accessibility is here. And then moving into this web and this, which not everybody has accessibility, but you've made sure that that growth and that technology innovation is staying on the television as well, or what we're the traditional television set, because of that accessibility. Was that something very deliberate, that we don't want a lesser experience here, what with kids watching television? You may not have a laptop, or may have to go to the library to use a computer, something like that. And it's harder to make that technology, because on your laptop, like you said, the little girl waving, that's a really more one-on-one intimate experience with a laptop computer. So how did that technology versus like taking off and going in this new direction to make sure that both were still there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it comes back to just being really core to who we are and needing to be relatable and accessible to all America's children, is what we say. So for many years, my focus was very much on the digital side. And as we added new platforms, we would think about what are the accessibility needs on this platform, because you have children who only have broadcast. So I'll get to that in just a second. Um, but then children who do have access to a device, in many cases, it's not a very high end or new
Mm-hmm.
device. Even in those kind of early phone years or early computer years, it was a hand me down.
Mm-hmm.
So you were talking about 2 or 3 generations removed. And then you have so many families who don't have great internet connection
Right.
at home, or schools, libraries, and community centers who didn't have the best or fastest connections. So on the technical side, we always talk about the test bed. Like, what are all the devices that we want to make sure that our content works on, and at what point it starts to degrade gracefully. So a
Mm-hmm.
child might still be able to play, but without all the bells and whistles. And we have an incredibly large test bed, because we want to make sure that even on those older devices, a kid can use it. We built our PBS Kids Games app and our video app in such a way that kids can download the content when they have Wi-Fi, so that if they don't have it at home,
Okay.
they can still play games or watch a video,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of swap it out like you would at a library the next time they have a connection, the next time they are in a
Mm-hmm.
space where they can do that. So that's one aspect of accessibility. And also, as you mentioned, broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
So PBS launched a 24/7 broadcast PBS Kids 24/7 channel in 2017. And that felt like a bizarre thing to do because, so much was moving to
Yeah.
streaming that was happening so rapidly. But what the leadership could see in all of the data was that there were a lot of kids in lower income communities who were watching just hours and hours of television.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see in the overall Nielsen data that they were continuing to watch
Mm-hmm.
after PBS moved away from children's programming. So they were watching things that were not appropriate for
Right.
them.
Right.
And when we launched that channel, it was just immediate audience. And we received so many letters too from children's hospitals,
Oh,
from
interesting. Uh-huh.
places that needed content in the middle of the night. Just saying, being able to have a broadcast channel that we can just turn on and know we don't have to worry about it has been such a gift. So, but when we launched that, to your point, like we wanted to keep that accessibility possible
Mm-hmm.
on that broadcast, in that broadcast space, and make sure everyone could still receive it. When we launched it, we at the same time launched a digital live stream of that channel. And so what that means is that you now can watch that 24/7 channel in any way.
Right.
You can stream it there. You
Right.
can watch it on YouTube TV. You can watch it on Hulu Live. It allowed us to not only be kind of on the more cutting edge technologies, but also because we were already programming this for broadcast, it allowed us to stay on those other spaces as well.
Okay, that's fascinating. I can remember when you said that, I just had this memory of when like my being little and watching and my program, like when Sesame Street was over or
Right.
whatever the next show, and then going to like the adult.
Yeah. We always hear stories about that, about like when the news hour would come
Right,
on, right
right. I can remember
after.
that when it was ended. It was like,
Yeah,
because I don't, I will age myself to be like, there were like 5 channels before.
right. Exactly.
And then, yeah,
Yeah.
when it was over, it
A
was
really
not,
different world.
yeah, it was not fun.
Yeah.
So staying kind of on the accessibility, I wanted to ask about the one that has been just so interesting and so, I think exciting recently is your ASL, and
Hmm.
working with
Yeah.
the hard of hearing in the deaf community in such a different way. So my daughter is in high school, and she's taken ASL as her foreign language, which is, it's not offered very often. She has a very, progressive high school, but one of the reasons that she took it was because of the servant leadership and the service aspect of it that comes to it. So
Hmm.
if you're taking honors ASL or ASL4, you are working in the deaf community, a certain number of hours a week, and you're at the deaf. We have a deaf college right near us that they work. And so when her teacher, it was like the day that the announcement came out a few weeks ago. I sent it to her at the same time she sent it to me, and she was like, "Look,
Oh, that's so funny.
this is her teacher brought up." But so tell me about that thinking and about how that is in the kind of the culture of PBS, where you're pulling out these pieces that you can take further. And
Yes.
there's some that maybe not as much. I mean, you have the representation on screen, but there's some that you can go deeper like this. So tell us about
Mhm.
how those conversations start and how those decisions are made.
I'm so glad, first of all, that you already know about
Oh my
this.
gosh, it's so
In it.
exciting. Yeah.
Yes, it's so exciting that we were able to do this. So PBS has a long history in accessibility tools.
Mhm.
So closed captioning, a lot of people don't realize, was actually created by public media
Okay.
in Boston. And so that is something that, again, has been kind of in the DNA of public media from the beginning, is how do we make sure that all Americans can experience this content. So the so we've had closed captioning on all of our broadcast shows, and we have them on all of our streaming shows. We've been adding descriptive audio and spending a lot of time thinking about how to make sure that works for people who are kids who are watching who have
Mhm.
visual impairments.
Mhm.
We also have been thinking about how we can bring that into games as well. So closed captioning on games,
Mhm.
descriptive uh, pieces on games, and then also thinking about kids who are neurodiverse. If there are ways that we can, sensory overload
Right.
can be a big thing. Are there ways we can offer an opportunity for kids to lower the background sound in a
Mhm.
game so
Mhm.
that they can focus more specifically.
Mhm.
So we have a team who works on universal design for learning, UDL, and we work with a lot of outside advisors and consultants. And in this case for ASL, it came to us really through two of our amazing producers, Fred Rogers Productions in Pittsburgh and GBH Kids in Boston. And they worked with the Bridge Multimedia and the Described and Captioned Media program to then think about how would we do ASL interpretation for young children that isn't just that box in the corner.
Right.
So what we were hearing from advisors is that sometimes was too small and for little kids harder to interpret. And so we did a series of experiments and research, talked to a lot of advisors, and worked with several aspects of this. So one is that you'll notice that it's different if you watch these episodes, is that the interpreter is not in a box, but instead moves around on screen with the action, or is at the same size as the characters. And the thinking there was that for a preschooler, this interpretation is of equal importance of everything that's happening on the screen. So let's have it be right there in the line of sight. Some other things that we are hoping to understand through this is, in some cases, the interpreter is wearing a different color T-shirt based on the character that they're interpreting for. Sometimes there are like different props, like the interpreter for Arthur is wearing glasses because Arthur also wears glasses. So trying to make more of a connection to the characters there. And it's just been amazing that we could launch 60 episodes. So we have 6 shows who are each, put 10 episodes up. So 60 full length episodes that we could put out on all of our digital platforms and on our YouTube channel. And the hope is that we can continue to expand this.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Is it a big, does it increase the time for production and the expense for production to
yes.
add that in, especially the integrated way you're doing it?
Yes. In this case, we had grants, and those went to those 2 organizations, Bridge Multimedia and the Described and Captioned Media Program. They each received grants from the U.S. Department of Education to do this. And so the hope is that we can really look at how is this resonating with the deaf community and the hard of hearing community. Do we have the right approach for it? And then how would we then look for funding to expand this and to bring it to even more programs? Okay. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how the projects come to you, about the creative teams, how what's kind of homegrown and part of PBS's own production organization, and then how do you vet and assess projects that come to you guys from the outside? And there's so many new things coming and there's so many projects, but I'm sure you probably turn away a lot as well. So can you talk to us a little bit about how that, and who's the team that kind of is making those decisions?
That's yes. First, the team is fantastic. We have a really
hard job.
Amazing team. And I often say that one of the best things about working at PBS is that you're working with people who are also here because they believe in this mission. They are passionate about media for children that can try to do new things, can help them learn, can help them feel seen, can help them find a world of possibilities. So the people are really fantastic. And when we are looking at projects, because we really are a multimedia, multi-platform organization, we are looking for shows that are full-length episodes, like Arthur, like Wild Kratts, 30-minute blocks. But we also now are looking for short-form content. So City Island is a relatively new show that's focused on civics, and those episodes are much shorter, but that is a way that works on digital platforms. It also is a way for us to work with the curriculum that maybe doesn't work as well for full story, 30-minute kinds of things, but really can do something exciting within 7 minutes. Games are also really important to us. And we've had games connected to our shows since 1999 and 2000. That was one of the first things I was working on too. We also do podcasts, and we do specials. So like hour-long movie kind of specials as well. So to get to your question about the team, what it means is we have people from all those disciplines who are also looking at content when it comes in. And so we do accept pitches from anyone. We have a portal that if you go to pbs.org and about PBS, you can find the ways that you can pitch a project to PBS. And so we take a lot of projects in that way. We also periodically put out requests for proposals when we're looking for something that meets a specific
Oh,
specific curriculum area, for example. So
Mhm.
we sometimes, if we have a grant or if we're just looking across our library and feel like we're a little low in a certain curriculum area, then we'll put out a request for proposal for something that is really focused on literacy or more recently computational thinking, so early building blocks of computer science.
Mhm.
So that's another way that that we receive projects. Public media is made up of member stations throughout the country. So depending on where you live, you might know that station. Like you might watch NPT in Nashville, you might watch KQED in San Francisco, or Arkansas PBS, which is the statewide network. All of those stations actually own PBS. So this is not a top-down organization, but instead we are the body that takes dues from all the members to find programming that can work across the whole country. But then there are local shows and local podcasts and local short form programming happening all over the country. So a lot of our content comes through those stations. And then we also work with a lot of independent producers. So today I've already mentioned Fred Rogers Productions, but GBH Kids is a member station in Boston who brings a lot of content to us. So another thing, though, that I think it's important to understand of the PBS model is that we're very creator driven. So we're looking for ideas that come from someone who's really passionate about the idea they have forward and understands how that curriculum can fit with it. What's different about PBS than a lot of other networks is the creators then continue to own their content. So we don't buy the content outright. We instead have an exclusive license to distribute it to kids in the United States, but then that continues to be the ownership of that creator. So it's really a co-production kind of partnership that we're doing for all of our shows, which is a little unusual in this market, but I think is one of the things that also makes PBS exciting for a lot of producers. It also means we don't fully fund things. So we work with producers to help them find additional funding and financing to then bring a project to fruition. But what I think is what's fun right now in this multi-platform environment is we will take pitches and proposals that come in, and we might have something come in as a pitch for a 30-minute show and can say, this actually sounds really exciting for short form.
Or a
And
game
we'll try
or something, and so you guys can move it around.
something different. And so we have original games on pbskids.org and on the Games app. And so we really have so many different paths for content to come in. And then the other thing that's really important for us is that every piece of content we create is based on learning frameworks. And so we are working with advisors for every property. And so we have documents we share with producers that kind of help them understand, like, what are the things that we think kids should be learning at different points? Where are they emotionally? What kinds of conversations would a child of this age have? So lots of background research for our producers to work with, but then they also often bring on their own advisors. Particularly, if that's necessary to a storyline or to the background of particular characters, making sure that they really can represent those characters properly, and make sure that everything that happens within the show is really meeting kids where they are.
Does the PBS organization produce any content itself? Do you have like in-house production? So you don't have like
very little. Very
so
little.
Everything, like you said, Fred Rogers or the Sesame Street Network, everything is coming from outside production in.
Right. There are a few cases where there's like very short form things we needed to do quickly, where there'll be a little bit of ownership, but on the whole, things are really owned by the creators. And
I want to get into the technology of some of the new stuff, but before that, I want to ask. So you've talked a little bit about funding. You mentioned some grants. So can you talk about? I don't think that people understand how PBS is funded and not being beholden to commercials or upfronts and sponsorships. So can you talk a little bit about how that and what does that kind of what does that look like as we flow through these, as the economy flows up and down, how does that affect the business model of PBS?
Well, I think it's always important to say the majority of funding comes from viewers like you. Really, it's such a well-known line and often kind of a joke, but it's actually very true.
Right.
Those donations that go to member stations throughout the country are the things that really fund the bulk of what we do. So there's this piece. There is a federal appropriation that comes through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and I feel like that's like between 11 and 14% of our budget.
Okay.
It's a lot of people kind of assume PBS is funded by taxpayer dollars, and it's a very little bit of that. And then we have a lot of support from the philanthropic community or federal grants. So I already mentioned the U.S. Department of Education is what funded the ASL episodes, not directly to PBS, but through these other organizations. But we also have some funding from the Department of Ed that we've applied for to help us do some work in different areas. The National Science Foundation also funds some of our shows, as well as private philanthropies. So it's every project is different. The ways that we kind of cobble together the funding and the support. And then because producers own their own IP, they can then distribute them internationally and license it to other distributors throughout the world, or do plush toys, do things like that would also extend, and books extend the brand, but also give them opportunities to help support their program.
Okay. And when people are making donations to their local PBS station, does that go into the whole, or does that stay with their local broadcast?
It's both, because it goes to their local station to kind of help support that local community production and distribution, but also then that station is then sending dues to PBS as well.
Okay. And with the Department of Education and the different federal, does that do those ebb and flow with the economy? Do they ebb and flow with different administrations? Do those grants, do they stay pretty steady?
They stay pretty steady, as does the appropriation. There's a lot of bipartisan support for PBS. It's definitely something that people across age spans and across ideologies seem to really appreciate. The Department of Education funds we do have to apply for every 5 years. It's a competitive program, so it's never a guarantee, but something that we have really great distribution and a strong track record. So we really love partnering with the Department of Ed. So. And with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is actually the entity that is applying. So we're partners with them as well with their education team.
And with corporate sponsors, you take corporate sponsorship from their philanthropic arms versus just corporate branding sponsorship. Is that correct?
I think it can. I'm not 100% sure. The sponsorship is often managed by the producers themselves, or there's some organizations that kind of several producers come together to look for sponsorships together. And so we have our editorial guidelines and our guidelines for how sponsors can come in. But I don't believe it's always just the philanthropic arms. So.
I just think that's something really interesting, especially young people starting out in production. There's just so many avenues out there, and I think organizations like PBS and, like you said, owning your IP, and it's just something that people don't hear about. And I love for our young listeners and people starting out in the industry to really understand how many different avenues, different business models, different things that are out there for whether they're on the creative side or wanting to be more on the business side of broadcast or of that side of entertainment. It's very, very interesting. I want to ask you about, I know we still have a little bit more time. So I was with the new work that you're doing, we talked about podcasts and we talked about getting content from books and all the gaming. This technology that you guys are testing and using now, the interactive technology,
Oh, yeah.
is and you've talked a little bit about AI, which I know is such a hot topic, bad word, good word, but I'd like you to talk a little bit about the AI you're using, the non-generative, but the ability for interactive is,
Yes.
I couldn't even wrap my head around it. I'm like, I have got to have Sarah explain this to me because this is
Sure.
fascinating.
And this fits right into our conversation earlier about like every new technology is an opportunity for us to try things out and see like how could kids learn from this. So this project, we it's conversational episodes is what we're calling it, and it is a National Science Foundation grant funded research project right now that we intend to then launch to the public once we're complete with the research pieces. But it's built on the research that comes from decades ago that if a child has a conversation with someone else, usually a grown-up, with a teacher or a parent about what they watched, the learning gains are greater.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably through the years have heard about co-viewing, the idea that you should sit down and watch television with your kids and then have conversations about it. And that also that extends to gameplay as well. If you talk to kids about what they played, if it's an educational game, the learning gains are greater. And so through the years, we've thought a lot about how to support parents with that. We know parents are busy and can't always sit down and watch television with their kids. And the truth of the matter is, PBS is so trusted that parents turn on PBS because that's the one time they know they can go make dinner
Right.
and not worry that anything inappropriate is going to happen
Right.
or that there's going to be something that will scare their child. So, you know, we take that trust really seriously and we want them to be able to do that. So how do we then also facilitate this idea of conversation about what the kids are learning? You've seen probably lots of episodes like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood where Daniel asks a question and then pauses. And if you watch preschoolers, they will respond to Daniel.
Right.
They will talk to Daniel. And that is intentional. That is really to try to get that conversation started. So what we wanted to test then once the technology really became available was what if that character could have a full conversation with you or some part of a conversation to try to build on the learning gains of the show itself. So the first round of research was focused on a science-based show, scientific inquiry process, technically, called Eleanor Wonders Why. That is for preschoolers. And this show is not one that breaks the fourth wall. She doesn't ever turn and speak to the camera directly, but we took episodes working with the producers, with Jorge Cham and Daniel Whiteson in California, and with the university partner, University of California, Irvine, and University of Michigan. We worked with the script writers to then write additional pieces to set within the episodes. So you would watch a segment, and then Eleanor has a new segment where she turns to camera and asks the kid a question about what just happened. And the AI we're using then is really to parse the children's language and response. So she asks a question and the AI is figuring out like, okay, what words did the child use that would make sense for all of the possible answers? And we're using script writers to then write all of the ways that you might respond to the child. I feel like it's a great marriage of human creativity with that like big machine processing, like language models to really put this together so you can have something that feels like a conversation. So in the episode where they can't get the ketchup, the special sauce out of the bottle, she then will stop and say, what could we do? And we're listening for things like add water to it, goopy, like too thick. Thinner, you know, like all these kinds of things. And then she can respond. So the first educational trials with this were very positive and saw some gains in knowledge over just watching the episode on its own. And so we now are in a second grant with NSF to do Eleanor Wonders Why. I now have expanded to a show that's for slightly older kids, 4 to 7-year-olds, called Lila in the Loop. It's focused on computational thinking. It's our newest show, so I'm just going to stop and do a little plug. It's our newest show. It's so fun and funny. and really resonating with kids. So Lila in the Loop, then we're in tests right now with those kids to see how you can ask questions about like patterns and debugging and logic, the things that go into computer science. But I think the research results are so promising and interesting. And one of the things I love about this too is that when kids are watching something like this, they often are in a family space where they can be overheard.
Right.
And the questions that the characters are asking are the same kinds of questions that a parent could ask about a show. And so being able to then also help support parents and thinking about, oh, these are things I can ask. These are really easy questions that aren't yes, no questions and aren't requiring a lot of scientific knowledge on the parent's part, to get my kid talking about what they're seeing and processing it and trying to think through their own hypothesis. So I think this is beneficial for both kids and the parents to kind of understand how you can extend the video experience.
And any of those things that help, that make you feel like you're learning. And I can remember myself, talking back to Sesame Street, and you're counting with the count, and you're doing in Romper Room, with that, all of those. But then, and then the evolution, obviously, of my own kids going. But the fact that they can actually, hear them, read their lips, whatever the technology is, and formulate those responses and that engagement is. And again, I think about the very, like we said, the very base of our society that is watching broadcast television, that may not have all of these other devices, that interaction isn't now unavailable to them. It's just, when I was reading those articles, I was like, this is the most fascinating thing, that somebody that like you said doesn't have high Wi-Fi, isn't streaming, isn't doing all these things, that can still have this interaction and still gain that educational advantage from that base is just so amazing. How far will that go? Will it go? If it proves successful, it'll go into other shows. And continue on.
And it probably, to your question about accessibility, it will likely launch on digital platforms first, because that will have that microphone and that processing. So not ready for broadcast yet, but the technology, it's possible.
Yeah, it is.
And if we have that, if we have this model and we have this kind of research backing of this is an appropriate way to do this for kids, that really can help build on their knowledge, I feel like that's going to be something that's applicable to lots of different media types. This kind of research we always publish to everybody, to the industry and to the academic community, because we want people to build on it. This is part of who we are as public media. If we know something is going to work, and we know this is something that can be positive for kids, then more people should be doing it.
Yeah, right. And the answers are going to be, whether you're a preschooler in front of a television or in front of a computer, they're going to be the same types of answers. And so those kids and broadcast are going to get the same advantage. You just said something interesting. So tell us where do you share all your data? Where do you share your learnings?
The research. So there's a site for teachers of PBS content called PBS Learning Media. And that's where any educator can go and search by grade level and by subject to discover like what PBS content is available for use in your classroom, lesson plans, questions, assessment tools, all kinds of things. So that's just a treasure trove. And that is also where we publish our research results. So when we are fortunate enough to have a university do like a randomized control trial or really get into the learning gains from our shows, the studies are published there. But we also, we partner with a lot of universities. So I mentioned UC Irvine and University of Michigan. And so they're publishing articles based on this NSF-funded research in academic journals. And we're really hoping that even more universities will be interested in partnering with us to then do research on our content and publish that. Every once in a while we hear about dissertations someone has done based on a PBS shows, and we try reach out and learn more, and then also publish those findings, share them with media outlets, because I think it just helps all of us understand what can we learn from this media and how kids learn through it.
It's a fascinating melding of all of these different technologies and all of these different, sides of entertainment and media that we want more people to know. And I know we're almost out of time, but I want to ask a little bit more about you. Tell us what I love to hear, you obviously love your job and you love what you're doing. You love PBS. Tell us a little bit, like what are you watching and reading or listening to that you're loving, or how do you kind of have your wind down time?
My wind down time. Well, I have two kids who are 12 and 9.
So you don't have a lot of wind down time.
They were, but they were definitely PBS kids all the way through. So helpful during the pandemic when we were stuck at home to have two kids in our audience in my house. They became like professional testers.
Right. A little focus group
for us. But I engage in a lot of media with them. I'm really interested in what they're watching. So we will watch shows together. Lately we've been watching, is so on brand for me. We're watching The Great American Recipe on PBS, and then An All Creatures Great and Small. Those are great shows for elementary school kids. And so that's fun wind down. I've continued to have just a real love of books and publishing and follow kind of what's happening in middle grade fiction. And so I love reading out loud with my kids and going to the library and things like that. So, and then my husband was active duty military until not just a few years ago. And so for 5 years, I had to take my PBS career on the road. I worked out of member stations. And so, which is amazing support from PBS to be able to do that. But it was such a great experience for me to then see a member station on the ground, like in San Antonio, Texas. I worked out of their offices and saw how they were taking our shows into communities and doing work on the ground with preschoolers in a way that really kind of brought
a gift. Oh my gosh.
But the reason I mentioned it is that we are a family who loves to travel and hike and, just get out and see new things. And I think part of it is that military family.
Well, thank your husband for his service. And what a gift to you and your children to be able to. Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite place where you've traveled and lived?
Well, I have to admit we lived in Hawaii for 2 years, nice. And that was pretty incredible. It did require that I opened the station at 5 a.m. They let me unlock it and turn all the lights so I could, be on Skype. It was Skype back then, back to the PBS office. But what a beautiful place to work.
Right.
And PBS Hawaii was doing such interesting things in producing, and still are producing, a lot of documentaries about local culture and music. I learned so much just about the place I was by being in this station. So it was really special.
No, that sounds it. Well, Sara, this has been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's really, obviously I love to talk about PBS Kids, so thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I think this is just, it's just such a media conglomerate, and that people I don't think they look into enough as they're thinking about entertainment as a career and thinking about media as a career. So this has just been, I know our listeners, our community is going to really, really enjoy this. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. I think that a lot of people know PBS, but don't realize that, we have 15.5 million kids a month on digital platforms.
Right.
Even beyond broadcast. If you don't have young kids, you might not know that there are 250 games on our PBS Kids Games app and 350 on PBS
and using it, but also just from the creator side of it, there's just so much there and opportunity, and the way that you structure is so interesting. It's really been fascinating. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the chance to talk about it. I really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To stay up to date with In Her Words, join the conversation by following Women in Entertainment on our social channels, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter at womeninentertainment.com.